So are you saying that for that grant or that person that lives in Queens, the universal child care so that they don't have to pay the cost of rent per kid in America would not help that person out?
No, can we talk about what's realistically going to happen? I don't know how Governor Hochul doesn't see this. When you tax the rich leave. They will go to Puerto Rico.
Policy.
They are going to, I understand, nationwide or statewide, it doesn't make a difference. If the rich people are going to suffer for being rich,
Bezos is very clearly talking about personal tax.
What's good, everybody? Welcome back. So today we're getting into something that had CNN's panel fired up. We're talking taxes, billionaires, and whether the ultra-wealthy are actually pulling their weight. Jeff Bezos said some things that turned heads across the political spectrum, and then the debate exploded with Isaiah, Alyssa, and MAGA commentator Emily Austin going back and forth hard. Emily's out here defending the billionaires. Isaiah is dropping real numbers. And Alyssa's zooming out to the bigger picture nobody wants to talk about. It gets heated, it gets messy, and honestly, some of it might change how you think about this whole conversation. Stay until the end, because I've got my own take on all of this, and I'm not holding back.
Billionaire Jeff Bezos has some thoughts on taxes that even the likes of Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could get behind.
A nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year pays more than $12,000 a year in taxes. Does that really make sense? So people talk about, making the tax system more progressive. How about we start by having the nurse in Queens not pay taxes? We already have the most progressive tax system in the world. The top 1% of taxpayers pay 40% of all the tax revenue. The bottom half pay only 3%. We have already, and I think it should be zero. I don't think it should be 3%. Right. I think it should be zero. So we'd be making it more progressive that way.
This made a lot of waves. A lot of people talking about this. Isaiah, do you think Jeff Bezos has a point here? What's his motivation in saying this?
That's the question.
Look, I think that Bezos has a variety of things that he's looking at. Maybe he wants to run for office. Who knows? You never really know. At the end of the day, I do think that it's rather interesting that Jeff has talked about whether or not the 1% is paying effectively too much in taxes. I think that's a pretty absurd argument to make because Amazon only paid about 1.4% of corporate taxes, and they got $17 billion worth of tax breaks.
And we talked about this issue when he did this interview, and it also comes down to about how the American tax code is written, and you have wage earners, and then you have people like Jeff Bezos who are paid in a very, very different way, and that is taxed in a very different way.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that there's, I think some people would probably be surprised to realize that the bottom 50% is roughly people making $55,000 a year as individual earners, and below that, I think there's a lot of Americans who feel like, well, I'm among those who are struggling, but especially in major cities, you're making a little more than that, you're making closer to six figures, and you may think that you're struggling to get ahead in the state of this inflationary economy, and you need relief. This would not give you relief. I mean, I'm for completely revamping the entire tax code, and I think the 1% is way too broadly defined, but there's way too many carve-outs for the very top, and I think that this is an animating issue. I think in this populist moment on the right, there is a moment that you could have future politicians, if a J.D. Vance ends up running, that lean a little more into the taxing the billionaires, which has never been a Republican position previously, but I think there is an appetite for the wealthiest to contribute more.
I want to play another clip from Bezos that he was making the case that he pays billions of dollars in taxes and that that raising those wouldn't necessarily help a teacher in Queens. This is what he said.
These people sometimes say that I don't pay taxes. That's true. I pay billions of dollars in taxes, and it's a perfect. Again, if people want me to pay more billions, right, then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you. So you can't connect those two things, not logically.
New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani tweeted after that. He said, I know a few teachers in Queens who would beg to differ. Emily, what were you going to say?
First of all, I'm surprised Mamdani wasn't patting him on the back with his initial statement. I thought every single socialist or communist-leaning person would applaud Jeff Bezos for what he was saying. But I'm just really, really sick of this bashing of the billionaires, because the billionaires actually are the ones contributing the most to society. Let's talk about how many. Oh, yeah, I feel so bad for them. Let's talk about how many jobs.
The poor billionaires. Who is going to fight for the billionaires?
Amazon has created. Let's talk about how many people are paying their bills because of Amazon. How many people have benefited from the creation of the jobs in that. So I'm just really against this whole oh my God, the capitalists are the bad guys. In terms of his motivation, I think that's the question. I wasn't even thinking about a political run, but that's starting to make the most sense. And then theoretically, he's not necessarily wrong. If you are not taxing them, they're probably spending more money into the economy, and that wealth is spreading on its own organically. However, you're right. This is not the traditional Republican thinking, and the handouts and the free money does not solve the problem.
Ever since the Republicans cut the top corporate tax rate. We know the private sector's investment to build new manufacturing facilities has decreased. So it hasn't spurred an increase in investment into the economy. We've seen that across the board, and that's from Fred data.
No, I'm talking more of like the lower 50% who, where if they had extra money, they'd probably go to the grocery store and spend it. They would probably be spending that money because they needed it.
Well, let's do some math here. So if you were to get rid of Amazon's $17 billion worth of tax breaks, right, and you were to double it, as Bezos would say, that'd be enough to cover universal child care for every single child in this country.
Okay.
So are you saying that for that grant or that person that lives in Queens, the universal child care, so that they don't have to pay the cost of rent per kid in America, would not help that person out?
Can we talk about what's realistically going to happen? I don't know how Governor Hochul doesn't see this. When you tax the rich leave. They will go to Puerto Rico.
Policy.
They are going to, I understand, nationwide or statewide, it doesn't make a difference. If the rich people are going to suffer for being rich,
Bezos is very clearly talking
they're going
about personal
to leave
tax,
and bring their money elsewhere.
Right. Alyssa, you talked about the populism that we are seeing on the right. There's all, and it's kind of where the circle meets, right, with both sides of the aisle, because you have somebody like Elizabeth Warren, and do you start to see J.D. Vance and others kind of come together on this issue? It is interesting.
Yeah. I think the bigger issue here is that you have increasing unease in society, especially amongst the lower middle classes, about the future of work and the future of their place in a society where technology is changing so fast, and AI, to the sense that what you hear from great industrialists of the time is, don't worry, you don't have to do anything. And we'll give you an income, or we'll cut your taxes, and just sit back and let us handle this. And everything's going to be fine because the technology is going to solve all your problems. And I think that sort of ignores a lot of discontent, especially amongst young people on both the left and the right, about wanting to have a purpose in work that is not connected to just getting by, and wanting to have a place in a technologically AI-driven society where they can be creative and productive and rise in their careers and in their dignity, rather than just have billionaires tell them, don't worry, we're going to cut your taxes and then maybe we'll give you some money and you can just paint or whatever. And that's the bigger societal issue, rather than how much 3% of this or that on any given day.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is look, this is already a political issue, but this just seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And as we look at the midterms and you look to 2028, you can't help but think somebody needs to come up with a plan.
I think you are going to see politicians in 2028 who are talking about tackling AI, putting some kind of guardrails on it, some kind of pauses. That polls extremely well, because to Josh's point, there are these headwinds economically that are bigger than any political party, any candidate or current politician. The fact that the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar is 3 times less than it was in 1980, but the cost of everything is even higher. Like, people are working harder than ever and having a harder time getting ahead. People are going to be begging politicians to offer real big visionary plans, and I think there's a lane for people who are willing to do that. It's going to have to be bigger than, like, we're tweaking the corporate tax rate here and we're making it a little easier to e-file or whatever.
And I think we're seeing it already, because on both sides of the aisle, I see people are increasingly going against AI, and people are like, well, I don't want it replacing my job. And then I try to play devil's advocate, because I was speaking to somebody much older than me about this, and they're like, well, that's what they thought when cars came out, and that's what they thought when this innovation happened, but then more jobs are created elsewhere. And I try to be optimistic about it, but it's getting out of hand.
And managing those traditions can mean less suffering for millions of Americans. And we're not managing them right now, because the technology is outpacing the policy and the regulation. Look what happened at the White House this week. They were about to roll out an executive order to have a voluntary review of AI models. So, because it's a huge national security threat to throw these AI models out into the wild. Nobody knows what they do, much less export them. And they canceled it. It was supposed to be on Thursday, and they canceled it at the last minute because the Silicon Valley tech titans said, no, thank you. So this is where we are. We're failing to bring people along in this technological journey in a way that enables them to feel like they have a purpose in this brave new world.
It is. I was just going to say, it is a brave new world indeed. All right, I know, that was good.
All right, so Jeff Bezos comes out and says nurses and teachers shouldn't be paying taxes. And for a second, the whole internet kind of agreed with him. But here's the thing. You can't just cherry pick the part that sounds good and ignore the full picture. Because while Bezos is out here acting like he's looking out for the working class, Amazon paid somewhere around 1.4% in corporate taxes and pocketed $17 billion worth of tax breaks. So let's not get too comfortable applauding the man just yet. And then Emily Austin jumps in with the same tired argument we've been hearing forever. Oh, if you tax the rich, they'll just pack up and leave for Puerto Rico. I mean, come on. That talking point does not hold up when you look at history. Back in the 50s and 60s, the top marginal tax rate in this country was sitting anywhere between 70 and 91%. Anything over roughly $2 million in today's money got taxed at that rate, and it stayed that way for decades. And guess what? The rich didn't flee. They stayed, because there's no zip code in America where making $2 million a year means you're suffering. The other thing people need to understand is that if working people at the bottom pay nothing, and if Bezos and Amazon pay next to nothing, that money still has to come from somewhere. We're sitting here with a defense budget that Republicans want to push to $1.5 trillion, up from $800 billion not that long ago. That's a real number, and it doesn't fund itself. So who ends up picking up the tab? The middle class. The same people who are already stretched thin, already watching their purchasing power shrink, already working harder for less than their parents did. Corporations used to cover about a third of all tax revenue in this country. Now it's barely a rounding error, less than 1%. And somehow the argument from the right is still that corporations are overtaxed. It just doesn't add up when you look at the actual data. Now Alyssa made a point that I think gets overlooked in these tax debates, and it's bigger than just numbers on a spreadsheet. People aren't just worried about money right now. They're worried about their place in a world where AI is moving faster than any policy or regulation can keep up with. Young people on both the left and the right want to work, want to build something, want to feel like they have a future that isn't just dependent on some billionaire deciding to be generous. And when you've got Silicon Valley literally shutting down White House executive orders on AI review because it's inconvenient for them, that tells you everything about who's actually running things right now. Look, Mamdani is out here in New York showing that you can raise taxes modestly on the wealthy, people don't flee, and you can actually fund services for your residents. That's not radical. That's just governing. Almost every other industrialized country does this. Europe does it. Canada does it. The US used to do it. And the idea that we can keep cutting taxes at the top, gutting the social safety net, and somehow everything is fine. That's the real fantasy here. So I want to know where you stand on this. Are you buying the argument that we need to protect the billionaires? Or do you think it's time we actually had an honest conversation about making the people at the very top pay their fair share? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one.